Good morning, guys. Today we're going to be looking at structure and looking at the different structural devices and how to identify them in your text in both paper 1 and paper 2, and also to look at some of the effects of these structural devices. Now, as you know, this one is a little bit difficult, the structure question, because the difficulty comes from not knowing how to explain the effect of structure on the reader. Slightly different from the language question, but today let's hope that we can actually shed some light on how you can actually explain the effect of structure on the reader in your text. Now, the question in your exam is always going to be, how has the writer structured the text to engage and interest the reader? Now, the important thing is, how do we write this answer? So let's get straight into the first device now. Always, guys, when you're looking at your text, there's always going to be some sort of progression in your text. It starts at the beginning, it goes to the middle, and then it goes to the end. So always look at the beginning. What's the focus and where is the focus in the beginning? Right? Is it on a setting? Perhaps it's on the weather. Maybe it's on a character or a few characters. Or perhaps it's on the dilemma, the problem. So have a look when you read, because in the beginning already, the writer will establish a focus on maybe time, or maybe place, or maybe character, a relationship maybe on the character's thoughts, right? Already this will start to build up some sort of momentum in terms of your understanding and the progression of the text. It will always in the beginning start engaging your interest by maybe building up your curiosity when you're reading, maybe intriguing you in terms of what is going on and how it's happening, and what the character is feeling. Perhaps in the beginning there's already uncertainty created, or perhaps the writer is describing the weather as being very beautiful, or maybe using the weather to foreshadow through pathetic fallacy, for example. So have a look at the beginning and look at what the focus is on and how that focus changes. The next thing I want to talk to you about is the shift in focus. Now, with the shift in focus, what happens here is that the writer shifts the reader's attention from something to something else. So maybe from a setting or a place to a character, and maybe from the character to a setting, or maybe to the geography in the text, the time of year or the time of day. Now, normally the shift in focus also leads to a shift in tone. So have a look to see how there's a shift in tone as well. And does this build up your curiosity? Does it create suspense? Does it build up some tension perhaps? Now, if you look at the pictures in front of you, we have the focus first on the runner on the road, and then you have the reader's attention being focused on the setting, which is a wide open road, and then we have the focus of the attention of the reader on an accident that might have taken place later on that very same road. Now, that will definitely cause a shift in tone, leading from something that's quite optimistic and positive on a lovely sunny day to something negative and not so pleasant, like the accident, for example. Does it engage the reader's curiosity? Does it build up the suspense? Do we feel that perhaps they were victims of this accident? Has it impeded the progress of the runner on the road, for example? So have a look at those features in the text. Next, I want to speak to you about the flashback. Now, as the flashback suggests, it is going back in time for the reader. Okay. Normally during a flashback in a text, the character tends to remember events from the past or incidents from the past, right? These could be past memories, and why this is important and how it engages the reader is in the way that these memories give the reader some sort of context and background about the character. It gives us some understanding of the character's experiences and how the character feels. And this would also provide some sort of context on the character's dilemma or the situation that they find themselves in. So have a look to see if there's any flashback in the text, because the flashback is definitely a lovely structural device that you can speak about and explain how it engages the reader. Remember, flashbacks in text also tend to build up the suspense even further in an extract. So look out for that. The next thing I want to talk to you about is zooming in, or going from a very broad to a narrow focus. Now, normally when writers use this type of structural device, it's really giving the reader much more detail about perhaps a place or a character or an object in order to draw attention to that particular thing about that object or a character or a setting. And normally that is quite intriguing because it gives more information to the reader, and that might perhaps build up the suspense again, create intrigue, build up the tension, enhance the uncertainty that already exists in the context of the extract. So have a look. So if you look at this picture here with Miss Piggy, as you can see, the camera is zooming in closer and closer into her eyes in this picture, perhaps alerting the reader or the viewer to the fear that she feels, or the horror or the panic, because maybe she spotted something that's not very nice. Okay, if you look at this flower as well, we've zoomed into the petals and into all the different parts of the flower. Perhaps in a biology lesson, that would be quite useful. Okay, so let's have a look at now the narrative perspective. The narrative perspective is both, as you know, a linguistic device and a structural device. The narrative perspective is important because it does give us some sort of understanding about how the writer feels and what sort of perspective is being portrayed and depicted. You have the first person narrative and the third person narrative normally in your fictional text. You would also have it in your non-fiction text in your second paper, your language paper 2. But remember, the narrative perspective is really important in that it allows the reader to understand the situation from different points of view. So, for example, if it's written in the first person narrative, like in this one here, as you can see in this picture here, right, the reader shares a very personal, a very direct kind of experience with the character or with the narrator. As a result, there's a sense of immediacy that is being created, and that's the effect. The effect is that it has a sense of immediacy. There's a stronger sort of connection and bond between the narrator or the character and the reader, and this allows empathy as well on the part of the reader, because you share the feelings and you're aware of what the character is going through. On the other hand, with the third person narrative, here there's distance being maintained. It's a more omniscient, as you can see. It's a more overarching overview, a very omniscient, all-observing narrative focus, where the reader has an understanding of everything that is going on and is able to predict the course of events, and you have an all-knowing sort of understanding in a text. In that way, the reader maintains distance between the character or the narrator and the events of the text, and there is a sense of detachment as a result in the text. So have a look at the narrative perspective to see if it's written in the first person narrative or in the third person narrative, because that would give you some sort of idea of how the writer has written the text to engage the reader and to engage you when you're reading a text in the exam. Now let's move on to the dialogue. Now, dialogue is the actual speech in the extracts. When people are talking, as you would know, in normal general life, when we talk, we are expressing our emotions and our feelings. Now, when you have dialogue in a text, that's exactly what you're going to have. When you are reading the dialogue, you would see characters are expressing their feelings, their innermost thoughts and emotions, and through the dialogue, we get an understanding of their dilemmas as well, their fears maybe all the sorts of emotional turmoil that they're going through. And this might heighten the anxiety in the text. It might create some sort of urgency in the text, and it enables the reader to understand again the context and the background of the narrator or the character and understand their feelings, maybe empathize with them as well, right? And through the dialogue also, the writer might introduce the next part of the plot. So there's progression in the text. And this also brings immediacy to the text. It brings the dilemma into the sharp focus of the text. So look out for the dialogue, because it definitely reveals and exposes the dilemma or the innermost thoughts and feelings of the characters in a text. Now I want to go on to the chronological order in text. Now with chronological order, as you know, it's related to time. It'll give you a timeline. It'll give you the progression of events. Normally, if you remember from Key Stage 2, to show chronological order, we use certain time words like first, then, next, after that. But of course, it's not as simple as that now in Key Stage 4, as you know, right? You're going to look for transition words. For example, you're going to look for, words like a few seconds later, maybe, at the crack of dawn, after a while. So you can look at words, transition words. That's going to also give you an idea of the chronological progression in a text. And this chronological order in the text will also present the sequence of events that are taking place. And as a result, it develops the plot for the reader. In that way, it engages the reader. It tracks the events. It tracks the incidents from the beginning of the extract. And it engages the reader as a result. Because remember, you're having your suspense being built up, your tension being built up. You're having, lots of unusual incidents taking place. And then it engages the reader as a result right until the end of the text. So look out for chronological order. As you can see here, it's related to time. So have a look, because it will show progression. In this case, it's showing progression in a day, what's going on from, around about 12 o'clock to the evening, to about 9 o'clock. So have a look for chronological order and look at the clues that give you an understanding of the chronological order in a text. Next, I want to go on to the dilemma. Your dilemma, as you know, is related to the problem. It could be one and the same thing, or it could be something that causes the problem, or vice versa, where the problem causes a dilemma in the text. Now remember, your problem could be a physical problem, or it could be an emotional problem. When a character is going through some sort of emotional upset or turmoil or some sort of disturbed state of mind, that would be emotional, and that could be a dilemma when you're thinking and you don't know what to do, right? But then you could have a character could have a physical problem in an extract where they're stuck somewhere on a mountain and, they can't really escape. So that would be a physical problem that is causing the character to feel all sorts of emotions that might not be the best thing for his well-being. So have a look for the problem, you would always get some sort of dilemma, especially in your fictional text. So look for that and explain that and show how it interests the reader and engages the reader, because it does build up the suspense. It quickens the pace. It will create tension, and it will lead to the next part of the text, obviously, where the writer or the reader sees how the problem is solved, or how it might not be solved, and it might end up, getting worse. So look for the dilemma in the extract. The next thing I want to talk to you about is cyclical structure. Now, cyclical, as you know, is related to circular. Circular structure or cyclical structure is when the text begins in one way, but it ends in exactly the same way, right? There's no sort of progression in terms of the character's dilemma, maybe. So in this case, as you can see in the picture, at the beginning of the text, there might be a story that begins with how a child got lost in a forest. And by the end of the text, you might see that actually the child is still in the forest and he has not been found. He's still lost looking for his parents, maybe. Now, that would be a typical example of your cyclical structure. So it begins and ends in the same way. Now, look for cyclical structure, especially in your poetry as well. In your poems, for example, Wilfred Owen's poem, Exposure, we all know what happens there, right? They wait for the enemy, but nothing happens, okay? By the end of the poem, nothing happens because the soldiers are still sitting in the trenches, waiting to attack the enemy, waiting to actually fulfill their duty as soldiers, but nothing happens because all that happens is that they die of the cold. They don't really, have the chance to fight the enemy. So look for cyclical structure also in your literature, your texts and your poetry as well. Okay. The next thing that you would know that you might have learned already in school are your sentence structures. Now, your sentence structures are your long and complex sentences and then your short sentences. Now, both these types of sentences have different purposes in text, and you should be using this in your own writing as well, as you know, right? Now, with your long sentences, normally, guys, your long sentences are used very well in text to show different types of feelings, perhaps emotional and physical struggle, maybe. So it might convey, suffering, danger, as you can see in this particular picture. There's a man that's doing mountain climbing in the snow, and if that experience is described in a particularly long sentence, that would perhaps reflect his struggle while climbing up the mountain. Maybe the cold, the excruciating, intense, sort of freezing temperatures that he's experiencing, and that might be reflected in a really complex sentence. Okay, so have a look at that. Also, you might have long sentences that reflect the beauty of a place, right? A writer might take the time to actually describe the beauty of, like in this case, this beautiful meadow with the sunset in the mountains there, might be described in a really beautiful long sentence. So have a look at that, right? And then here you have a setting that has been, subjected to devastation, perhaps through an earthquake. And here again, a complex sentence might be used to describe the suffering, the struggle, the passage of time while people are waiting to be rescued, treacherous circumstances as well, agony, anxiety, anguish. So look for that. Right, then we have short sentences. And the short sentences tend to quicken the pace of the text because normally they are used in text to show horror, fear, anxiety, tension, building up the suspense, quickening the pace of the text, right? So have a look. If there's horror, you will find short sentences. If there's panic, you will find short sentences. If there's a sense of anxiety and tension and fear, you will find short sentences. So have a look to see how the short sentences pick up the pace and engages the reader because it builds up the tension. It might also create suspense and heighten the suspense and heighten the curiosity and the intrigue in a text. So have a look at that as well. Now, there's a few things you need to remember about structure. Never ever write in your explanation, in your answer, that it makes the reader read on. This is wrong. You will not get any marks for it. Say exactly, be really specific and say, how does it engage the reader? Does it build up the suspense for the reader? Does it create an awareness for the reader of the child's experience, right, as a slave in a factory? Does it allow the reader to therefore empathize with the child? And how is that shown? Maybe through the long sentences that reflect the struggle, okay, or the short sentences in the way that it creates suspense, showing that they're waiting and nobody's coming to rescue them, right? So have a look at the context. Have a look at the content. What is being described and how is it being described? What techniques are being used that engages the reader? So I hope that you found this lesson useful. Remember to be very specific, and remember to always look at the mark allocation to make sure you're writing sufficiently so that you can achieve the top band marks for this question as well. Thank you, guys. I do hope that you found this lesson useful today, guys. Please like, subscribe, and share. And if there's any specific topic you would like help on, do leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.